lectionary reading for this week is the Gospel of John, chapter 13, verses 31 through 35. Sometimes what appears to be a programming glitch turns out to be something the Spirit uses to improve upon the lectionary. When I clicked on a link to open the Gospel reading, instead of the verses I was expecting, it opened the entire 13th chapter of John. Being a person who can't help read whatever words are in front of my face, I read what was displayed, then went back to see again which verses were supposed to be our lesson. But the seed had been planted, and I couldn't abandon those introductory verses. Listen with me and see if you agree that the story of Jesus serving his disciples is a perfect introduction to his commandment to love as he loves. I'll be reading verses 1 through 17 and then the assigned reading of 31 through 35. Now, before the festival of the Passover, Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart from this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. The devil had already put into the heart of Judas, son of Simon Iscariot, to betray him. And during supper, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come from God and was going to God, got up from the table, took off his outer robe, and tied a towel around himself. Then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel that was tied around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus answered, "You don't know what I'm doing, but later you'll understand." Peter said to him, "You will never wash my feet." Jesus answered, "Unless I wash you, you have no share with me." Simon Peter said to him, "Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head." Jesus said to him, "One who has bathed does not need to wash, except for the feet, but is entirely clean. And you are clean, though not all of you." For he knew who was to betray him. For this reason he said, "Not all of you are clean." After he had washed their feet, had put on his robe, and had returned to the table, he said to them, "Do you know what I've done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for that is what I am. So if your Lord and teacher has washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have set you an example, that you also should do as I have done to you. Very truly, I tell you, servants are not greater than their master, nor are messengers greater than the one who sent them. If you know these things, you are blessed if you do them." When he'd gone out, Jesus said, "Now the Son of Man has been glorified, and God has been glorified in him. If God has been glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself, and will glorify him at once. Little children, I'm only with you a little longer. You'll look for me, and as I said to the Jews, so now I say to you, where I'm going, you cannot come. I give you a new commandment, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also should love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." This ends our gospel reading. Please join me in prayer. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be pleasing to you, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. There are a few historical, cultural things we should remind ourselves of while we consider the message in this passage. In a society where it is very hot and very dusty, and where most people travel by foot, and nobody wears Nike or Reebok, the proper protocol for the host was to have a wife, daughter, or servant wash the feet of the guests as a way of providing comfort to them. You may have noticed that Jesus got up from the table to wash the feet of the disciples. In other words, nobody in the group had taken it upon themselves to provide this service to the others. Somebody got the room ready, somebody got the food around, but nobody planned for this important piece of hospitality. So it didn't get done until Jesus, the guest of honor, got up from his place at the table and provided this very humble service for his friends. We know from Peter's initial reaction that there was embarrassment, perhaps a bit of shame at being served in this way by the person they all admired most. Peter's the only voice we have recorded, but it's safe to assume he wasn't the only one thinking these thoughts, and possibly not the only one protesting. Jesus insists on caring for them, and Peter agrees when he understands the significance of the kindness being offered. Jesus finishes by giving them a new commandment, very similar to the great commandment that we say each week with the children, but with a challenging twist. Instead of saying to love as we love ourselves, Jesus tells us to love one another as he loves us. It's a very high standard. I was talking with my friend Andra earlier in the week, and she asked me how my sermon was coming. I told her I was looking for a modern-day equivalent to washing feet, and asked for her help coming up with one. As we were talking, I remembered an article I had read in Reader's Digest several years ago that was saying that a very common gesture that we offer as an act of friendness can actually provide a burden to the person we're trying to help. When there's been a death or a tragedy in a family and we say, let me know if there's anything I can do to help. And we mean it, but we've just placed the burden on the other person to figure out what it is that we're able to do, that they're able to ask us to do. Instead, we should be looking for ways that we can help and then showing up to do them. The writer shared a story about someone who showed up at his house. The writer's mother had died unexpectedly. Naturally, whenever there's a death, we're all a little bit scattered. But when it's an unexpected death, it can be an even bigger challenge to cope with. A friend knocked on the door, and when they answered, the friend was carrying his shoe shining kit. He came into the house, said, give me the shoes of everyone that everyone's going to wear to your mother's funeral. And he sat quietly, polished all the shoes, made sure the shoelaces were in good condition, replaced those that needed to be, and then left. He said that when he had a similar experience, that was one thing there hadn't been time to get to. And the day of the funeral for his loved one, he was very distracted because no one in the family had their shoes polished, and some of them needed new laces, and so he had decided at that time that this was what he would do to serve his friends. As Andra and I were discussing the thoughtfulness of that action, I realized she was my shoe shining person. She was a great support to me as my dad was declining. Early in Dad's final week, before we knew we were that close to the end, she called and suggested we make plans to have a girls' night together. She'd come to my house when she finished work on Friday evening, and we'd have dinner and just sit and talk and laugh, and kind of a distraction or diversion for me. As things worked out, my dad died that Friday just before noon. When I called to tell her, she asked what I wanted her to do, and I said, I don't know. So she said she'd come anyway, and I could let her know when she got here whether I wanted her around or not. Not only that, she'd still spend the night, but I didn't need to feel obligated to do anything. If I wanted to be with my family instead of her, that was fine. She'd be at my house in case I needed her, and would spend the night in case I needed someone to talk to during the night. Her companionship was just what I didn't know I needed. The next morning I had to leave with my family to get flowers ordered and take care of other details, and she'd made arrangements to meet her sister for lunch. So she said not to worry, she'd let herself out and lock up when she left. But she didn't tell me the whole truth. She cleaned my house before she left. I came home to a spotless kitchen, and everything else tidy and in its place, instead of the house that had been a bit neglected those last few weeks so that I'd have more time with my family. She loved me like Jesus, giving me the gift of her friendship in ways I didn't even know I needed. Some of you remember Reverend Carrie Nicewander. She was the co-pastor of Edwood United Church of Christ in East Lansing before she left to serve as a missionary in Lusaka, Zambia. Carrie preached here a couple of years ago. She has a blog about her experiences, and I want to share one of her recent entries. This is from Thursday, April 11th, and she calls it Treading Water. Shortly after arriving at the conference a week ago, we learned that our 15-year-old neighbor had almost drowned. While swimming at the beach, a riptide pulled him out into the Indian Ocean. We were in Cape Town, South Africa, along with colleagues from Zambia and from all over Africa. This particular neighbor, a very sweet kid who lives near us in Lusaka, arrived with his family a few days early. They went swimming at the beach and were unaccustomed to the currents that flow in South African waters. As Adam moved further and further away from shore, it became apparent to everyone on the beach that he'd been caught in an undercurrent. His mother tried to get to him, but the people on the beach stopped her. "There's no way to bring him back," they said. "You have to wait for the rescue team." They called emergency services, and Adam continued to recede into the ocean. On the beach, everyone started to pray, and some called their prayer chains to lift up prayers all over South Africa. They prayed for angels to hold him up when he grew weak, that he could stay afloat until the rescue services arrived. His distraught mother tried again to go to her son, but again was told not to go. Finally, she grabbed 2 life jackets and swam into the very cold water. She could not handle the thought of her son alone, struggling to stay alive in the frigid waves of the Indian Ocean. As she swam toward him, waves rose so high that she kept losing sight of her child. But she kept on going, kept on swimming, and finally she reached him. And there, next to her son, was another man who was calmly treading water at Adam's side. For when this man saw what had happened to Adam, he decided to jump in, to swim out, and to simply tread water with the boy. Together, the 3 of them stayed afloat until a boat arrived to bring them to the shore. Adam was taken to the hospital, treated for shock and hypothermia, and came back safe and healthy to our conference center that night. I sat with his mother while she cried and shared her story, and one thing she said will never leave me. "They were right," she stated. "We could never have pulled him in from that current. When they told me not to go, when they told me that I couldn't save him, they were right." And they all stayed on shore praying, and I really appreciated their prayers. She paused. But there was one man who dove in, and even though he knew that he could not rescue Adam, he knew that he could tread water with him, that he could stay near him and keep him company and help him to stay afloat. She breathed deeply and continued, "I think of all the times I do that, all the times I say there's nothing I can do to save someone, that there's nothing I can do to change things, so all I do is pray. But that man, he knew the one thing he could do. He dove in, and he swam out, and he treaded water with my son. He stayed at his side and kept him company and gave him strength, and that was enough. I need to dive in more," she said. "I need to tread water with people, even if I cannot save them. I need to find the one thing I can do." I'm so grateful that our friend is alive, so grateful for that complete stranger who treaded water at his side, and so grateful for the wisdom of his mother, who offered me those words that will never leave me. It's it's enough to tread water with someone. Here in Zambia, I know that we cannot save everyone. People will die of preventable, treatable diseases. People will be hungry, and people will be abused. Children will lose their parents, and parents will lose their children. And I will witness poverty that is too difficult to see, much less live. But I hope that I'm here to tread water with the Zambian people, to be with them, to encourage them, to lift them up, even a little, as they also lift me up. And as we float in the water, as we feel the chill of the sea, as we battle the swelling waves, we can pray together, we can hope together, we can trust together that God is coming, that love will win, that life is stronger than death. For we are an Easter people, and together we will tread water and wait, knowing that love wins, that life wins, that hope is our heritage. Thanks be to God.